Welcome to the Hormone Optimizing Warrior MD, your reliable and trusted source for information on hormone therapy for menopause and beyond, and on how to advance into the second half of your life with confidence and optimism, knowing your hormones are optimized and balanced with everything else in your body. Whether it is hormone therapy, peptide therapy, laser therapy, or some other new technology applicable to maintaining our vitality, mental and physical strength, you will hear all about it in this podcast. I am starting today's episode as the beginning of a series of episodes themed around hormone therapy options and on the topic of how to choose what type of estrogen therapy a woman can consider for the treatment of menopause. Which estrogen is best? Estradiol, estriol, both? Is there such a thing as the best estrogen therapy? And is there such a thing as the best estradiol? I did a similar episode a few years back. I discussed the best hormone therapy method. It did take me a few episodes. I'm pretty sure it was in 2023. But things are changing. Modern medicine does not stay still. Science advances, and the healthcare industry, mass production hormone therapy market is also changing. So this topic needs an updated conversation. I will keep the podcast episode formatting pretty simple and structured. I'm going to start with what's available for use as far as FDA approved products and obviously mass manufactured. And then I will continue the discussion and conversation around bioidentical hormone compounded therapy. I've already discussed the differences between the two in last week's episode, but in this small mini series, I also want to discuss why one woman might prefer a certain therapy versus another. And again, to make this very simple, each hormone therapy option as it comes along, I will discuss pros and cons, the main advantages, what are the major disadvantages, and somewhere at the end, I might insert my own personal wisdom on how I applied the criteria of choosing my own hormone therapy when it came to my own personal choice, and how I guide other women to choose theirs. Now, I do firmly believe that doctors should simply guide women to make their own decision, as the woman herself will have to assume responsibility for the use of the method and for her choice. And considering the extraordinary individuality of not just how the hormones are presenting themselves in terms of how many options you got, but also in terms of what your body's going to do with these hormones, which is unique to you. I always believe it's best if a woman gets involved in the decision-making process early on, instead of waiting for the paternalistic decision of a physician to tell her what will be best for her. Again, I really am a strong advocate for freedom of choice and all about informed consent. So when it comes to hormone therapy and you're one of my patients, you should listen to this mini series of episodes, complete it, and then have in your mind a clear picture. Like, this is what I want because of all these reasons. Now, sometimes I might actually interject and say, for what you want to achieve, this therapy is going to take you there in 6 months to a year or never. Whereas this other therapy option might actually be much more useful and get you the outcome you desire in 3 months. So sometimes that might need to happen, and the physician, I believe, has the obligation to tell you that information. What you do with it, it's your own decision and your own story, right? Now, you're likely familiar with the controversy between synthetic mass-produced hormones and compounded personalized hormones. I talked about it in the last week's episode. In case you missed it, please tune in because it lays it all out for you so you can understand the difference and grasp the possible value of one versus another. And I want to be clear from the beginning that one type of therapy is not better or superior to the other when it comes to how it will work poorly or not at all, or cause side effects. It ultimately depends on the individual woman and how she responds to it, not so much about the type of the therapy that's chosen. And that is why I like my patients to be involved in their decision rather than just waiting for me to make that decision for them. So I'm going to review all the FDA-approved synthetic mass-manufactured hormone products. Once I'm done with that, which will probably take me about 3 episodes, then I will move on to discussing compounded hormone therapy in the future episode, and then 1 episode will be dedicated to pellet therapy. So if you're at the beginning, there's a few more coming, just so you know. I always try to keep my episodes at about 30 minutes or slightly under. I've been told by some of the listeners there's too much information. They get overwhelmed, so they need to process it. So that's why when I run out of time, I'm going to move on to the next week's discussion. But today's episode is going to start the conversation focused on a very specific FDA-approved synthetically mass-produced hormone therapy option, which is the estradiol patch. There's quite a lot to say about the patch. So the conversation is going to continue next week on the topic of best use practices, monitoring levels, and definitely talking about the nationwide shortage of patches. That's coming next week. I will tell you all you need to know about the good, the bad, the ugly, as well as the beautiful. Everything you need to know from the perspective of a consumer. I will also share the science and the knowledge so you can understand how the patch works and how what might have worked for someone else might fail to help you. I will also discuss next week about how to monitor hormone levels when you're on the patch, because each specific method has its own bioavailability limitations. So to understand and consider monitoring, you will have to understand the peak and trough characteristics for each hormone product. So let's dive right into it. Let's lay it all out and talk about the patch. Why start with the patch? Well, because the estradiol patch is currently the most popular and the most requested form of hormone therapy, not just in my practice, but in many other practices throughout the United States and possibly in the world. Now, I have a very diverse type of practice. I practice all types of hormone therapy options available. I'm not a pure cash practice, so I don't just practice bioidentical hormone therapy. I am not just a pellet therapy practice, so I don't simply just insert pellets. And I'm not just insurance-based, which means I can only give my patients FDA-approved products. I pretty much use all the therapy options that are available. So even for a practice so diverse as mine, I can tell you that the patch is one of the most popular. Now, unfortunately, for the women who are deciding to use the patch as new users, and for the women who have been on the patch for a while now, who are established users, because of this popularity and because of the limited supply of patches, we are confronted by a very significant nationwide shortage of estradiol patches. It is actually so bad that pharmacies are restricting and limiting the distribution of patches to only 1 month at a time, refusing to fill in 90-day prescriptions. So first of all, why the sudden popularity? Because this is the number one reason why patches are in such a significant shortage, because they're so popular. So the demand is too high for the availability. Well, first of all, the removal of the black box warning around estrogen products, specifically transdermal and vaginal estrogen products, lifted the veil of heavily skewed negative information around estrogen and around estrogen's value for a woman's body. It allowed women to become more open-minded. It allowed so many women to shed their fear that somehow estrogen as a menopause therapy is going to harm them. For 20 years, since 2002, when the WHI study was released, women were kept in the dark and afraid of having estradiol prescribed for menopause relief. The statistical data collected for the past 20 years indicates that less than 5% of women who qualified for menopause therapy actually used an FDA-approved product. Now, we cannot track, and we do not know how many women have been using or are currently using bioidentical compounded prescriptions in the form of a cream or in the form of a pellet. We don't gather that data, and we can't even begin to estimate the numbers, but if they're just about the same as the FDA-approved ones, let's say we're looking at maybe 5 to 10%. fear is fear, right? So probably the same amount of women who are using FDA-approved products are also using non-FDA-approved products. Now, that means that 90% of women who could have benefited from menopausal therapy in the past 20 years have not been treated. That is almost an entire generation of women. So think about what will happen if just 25% of the untreated women decide they want estradiol therapy. Hence, your nationwide shortage. And I'll talk about that more next week. In case you are not an estradiol user yet, but you have been following my podcast, and after my discussion on the estradiol patch after today's episode, you might be excited to try it. You might think twice about it, and you might be better off picking a different method. So keep listening. I'll tell you what's available, because the podcast is meant to keep you up to date and provide you with all viable alternative solutions. But let's come back to the patch. Why is it so popular compared to the other FDA-approved products? Well, number one, it's covered by insurance, but so are most of the others with a few exceptions, and I will tell you about those when their turn comes. But if your estrogen therapy costs under $30 a month or it's completely free, would you not love it? Yes. Now, possibly the more attractive characteristic for many women is how easy it is to use it. You peel it from the carton and stick it on your skin once a week or twice a week. You apply it to the lower abdomen, upper arm, or the upper back buttock area. It sticks to your skin pretty reliably, and it does that for many women. You don't have to remove it for about 3 days if it's a twice a week patch, or an entire week if it's the weekly patch. If you compare this to something you have to worry about doing every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and not forgetting, because otherwise your symptoms are going to come back, this option clearly is going to be more convenient. So because a woman has to remember to use the patch only once a week or maximum twice a week versus needing to remember 7 days a week, something that's required to be applied to the skin or taken orally daily, it makes it more likely that women are going to be more compliant if they choose the patch. They will likely achieve better outcomes when it comes to results, but they will also achieve better outcomes because of the bioavailability of the patch, which I'll talk about next. Why do most providers and most women prefer the twice a week patch versus the weekly patch? Now, you might not understand why the doctor doesn't just give you a weekly patch and she prescribed the twice a week patch, because the weekly patch, if anything, is more convenient. Well, there are quite a few reasons. The twice a week patches are much smaller, and this is the biggest driver for this preference. The weekly patch will have to hold more hormones. It will need to be bigger. A smaller twice a week patch is more discreet and actually transparent in some brands, so it can be hardly noticeable. Women love that. Also, because of the smaller size, the twice weekly patch will tend to adhere better through thin and thick, so to speak. It will hold up better through showering, swimming in the pool, swimming in the ocean, or in case of excessive sweating caused by environment, if you live in Arizona, for example, or by vigorous exercise, or because you go to a sauna. And because it is smaller, it also less likely to cause noticeable skin irritation if you're sensitive to the adhesive. Now, again, this is all about the consumer preference. And let me tell you why doctors like the twice a week patch better. The argument for why the doctors prefer the biweekly patches is purely pharmacological. The patch has the built-in safety mechanism of estradiol levels going up and then coming back down to 0 before the next patch is applied. And that's true for both the twice a week patch and the weekly patch. Just like any other FDA-approved method, whether it's the pill, the gel, the mist that's sprayed on, it delivers estrogen and then it stops, right? If it didn't stop, then there would be stacking of estradiol. That's not safe, it's downright dangerous. So let's look at it this way when I explain this. Whatever needs to come up, the estradiol level, will also need to come down. And how it comes up and how it comes down matters when it comes to efficacy and how you feel using that therapy. With the twice-a-week patches, the dip in the estradiol levels happens very shortly before the new patch is required to be applied. So the timing of the dip in estrogen tends to be smaller and much better tolerated. Patients are much less symptomatic with better and more stable control of their symptoms on twice-a-week patches. That being said, there are newer once-a-week patches that apparently can hold the hormone better. Most of the times, it's just a matter of trial and error as to what patch works best for a specific woman. But the bottom line, and you need to remember this, the main reason why twice-a-week patch is preferred by doctors and also by a lot of women over the weekly estradiol patch is the fact that the weekly estradiol patch does not hold the estradiol levels for an entire week. Most likely, it maxes out at holding the levels and dips at about 4 to 5 days. So you are more than likely to be without estradiol for at least 2 days out of the week if you choose the weekly patch. Before the biweekly patch gained popularity, the weekly patch was prescribed most of the time. It was actually how it came out initially in 1990. It unfortunately does not work as well as the biweekly, and the manufacturers found out pretty quickly, and the doctors did too, and the patients told them. It does stop releasing estradiol earlier than the expected 7-day mark. And that's why the biweekly patch is superior and more sought after. It avoids a prolonged dip with the possible return of hot flashes and problems. Now, you should know a little bit more about the patch releasing estradiol and how it does that. It releases estradiol at a pretty steady rate for a few days until it doesn't, and it stops releasing it, allowing your estradiol level to come back to the baseline. Because of this feature, the bioavailability of estradiol released by the patch is actually superior compared to the up and down bioavailability that occurs daily with any other FDA-approved product that has to be used every day, like the gel, the spray, the oral pill. I have seen women get best control of symptoms on patches, but again, that's also highly variable between women and their skin characteristics. I'll talk more about that and patch limitations next week. So how effective is the patch? Well, when it comes to how effective a hormone therapy option will be, the woman has to take into consideration, and her doctor as well, the bioavailability of that specific product that she is choosing. Bioavailability is highly variable between different therapy options, and how often that therapy has to be applied or introduced into the body tells you everything you need to know about its bioavailability. The quicker you need to apply it or introduce it, the least amount of time between the doses, the less likely it is significantly bioavailable in order to be effective. As a reminder, bioavailability is how the hormone released by the specific hormone delivery method, in our case, the patch, how that therapy option is biologically available in your body. So for the example of the patch, how many hours of the 72-hour window for the biweekly patch that the patch is meant to be on your body, are you actually going to have estradiol? And how much estradiol is going to be released from the patch? And that's, again, relating to the patch dosing. Don't want to confuse you with the two. Remember, bioavailability is how long that estradiol coming from the patch is biologically available to circulate in your body and to interact with your body. And the dosing is the amount of estradiol that's being delivered. They're both very important when it comes to efficacy and the ability to give you the improvement that you want. Again, the bioavailability in the case of the patch is how long will estradiol be available to circulate into your bloodstream, delivering the estradiol, which is capable to biologically interact with your tissue and provide you with the hormone levels that you need to help support your sleep, your energy, help improve your mood, help take care of your sexual and urinary wellness problems, help improve bone strength, mental clarity, etc. Whatever it is that you are specifically looking for. Just a reminder, the level that you will get that relief will be different from woman to woman and probably unique to you. And the level to achieve relief for, let's say, hot flashes might be 50 for estradiol, but the level at which you will actually meaningfully build bone might have to be between 60 and 90. So keep that in mind as well. So to sum it up, the patch is great because it's covered by insurance, so it's highly affordable. You only need to apply it once a week or twice a week. It's very convenient. And it does come in 5 doses for the twice a week patch or a 6th dose for the weekly patch. There's quite a bit of flexibility there. And when it comes to patch dosing, people always ask, well, what's my dose? How should I start? How do I know what's best for me? Well, again, sometimes it's a matter of trial and error. And I will talk more about dosing in the next week's episode when I will give you my preferred criteria for how to choose a certain dose versus another. But in order to remember simply, the patch dosing is of the 5 tiers available is either very low, low, average high, or high. Now, the very low is 0.025. The low is 0.0375. The average is 0.05. That's just halfway in between what's available. The average high is 0.075, and the highest available is 0.1 milligrams. Now, the weekly patch has an additional option on top of all these other 5 options of 0.06 milligrams. So this availability of 5 tiers for the biweekly patch and 6 tiers for the weekly patch is much better than any other approved method. The estradiol pill has 0.5, 1 milligram, and 2 milligrams. Now, obviously, you can do 1 milligram and 2 milligrams. That's 3 milligrams. But it comes only in 3 dosing tiers. The vaginal ring comes in 2 dosing tiers. And the estradiol spray, it's 1 can, 1 spray, which you can use maximum for a day. So what dose should you start on when you start the patch? Should you start low and go up slowly? Should you start high and then go down if you don't need as much or if you have side effects? Should you monitor your levels? And when should you monitor your levels when you're on the patch, considering the gentle upslope in the estradiol levels, steady levels with a slow decline about 12 to 24 hours before you put on the next patch? And should you even start the patch if there is such a high, serious patch shortage with no end in sight? I will answer all these questions in next week's episode, and I will talk more about the nationwide shortage and how that might impact you. So please stay tuned. Thank you for the time and energy you spent listening to my podcast. If this episode or another have caught your attention and delivered valuable information you have not heard anywhere else, and if you feel I have succeeded in my mission to provide the how to stay healthy and age beautifully, please leave me a review. And any suggestion to improve the podcast will help make it better for you and for others. You can send my staff a message directly by sending an email to receptionist@herahealthcare.info.